Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is Tom Fowler and Fred Van Lente. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Howdy.
All right, so obviously we are here, and in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking about the new book, GameMasters, a comic kind of walkthrough of the history of RPGs or tabletop gaming, as we'll get into later. What made you guys both go down this road, kind of getting into the comic graphic medium?
I just watched a really interesting documentary on Albert Brooks on HBO, and he was like, his agent was like, "Why do you always take the hard road? You know, why are you making things so difficult on yourself?" And Brooks's response to that was, "Why do you think I see more than one road?" So for me, just Tom.
No. I mean, fair enough. I cut you off. I'm sorry about that. For me, it was just I've always drawn, and I just originally I wanted to be a newspaper cartoonist. As soon as I discovered that was a thing you could do, and then when I discovered that comics were a thing you could do, I shifted all of my focus to that. And I've done other things, but I've always somehow come back to this. So again, a singular road.
The only way you know how.
Yeah.
So then, Fred, for you, writing was also for you. That was just something you did as a child, and just
I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I loved comics, but I love movies and I love books, and so I guess it never really occurred to me that one could actually do comics for a living. Like I wrote Marvel in the 80s, and Mark Gruenwald, who was the editor of the Avengers back then, sent me this very lovely package with an issue of the Avengers with Roger Stern's Marvel style plot. So, but still, it wasn't until I went to Syracuse and I actually met people who were studying to be comics artists, and I started writing for them that I really kind of, really got into it. And then I moved here to New York City with a bunch of them to break into the comics industry, and it only took me 9 years, and they haven't been able to get rid of these sets. They keep trying. I just keep sticking around. It's like fingernails on the cliffside.
Well, it's funny you say that because that was described to me. I can't remember who I was at C2E2 in Chicago for, but they said, I think it was Gene Ha who said, once you're in the comic industry, he said, I think he's like, take your nails, dig into whoever you find walking nearby, and never let them go. And stay in there.
I usually find Gene, but I believe it. I like to say the comics is like the white van of careers. Like once you take the candy and go inside, you're never heard from again.
That sounds accurate. Now, for both of you guys, as you kind of got into maybe past the high school and you're kind of getting into this maybe secondary education or what you're going to do, where did you kind of make that decision that you were ready to go kind of all in for these fields?
I have the privilege. I am a 50-year-old white man living in Canada. So I was actually able to go to an arts specific high school. So I did, 5 years of actual art every day, a couple of hours of art every day. And then and that allowed me to skip the first year of college. So I went and did the last 2 years of a 3-year illustration program at Sheridan, just outside of Toronto in Oakville. But I mean, like I said before, I was laser focused from the age of 8 that what I wanted to do and what I was going to do was comics. I had brief dalliances with animation and later on when I needed to make money advertising, but it was I probably short circuited a lot of the art tutelage that I got because of that laser focus. And I'm lucky that I had teachers that were as stubborn as I was and made me try other things, which I got good at doing those too. And so every so often I'll do one of those things and comic book people go, "What?" And it's nice, you know.
Yeah. And then Fred, what about you?
Well, like I said, I had gone to Syracuse to study filmmaking. Since I was like, I already know how to write words. I already knew prose. This very arrogant child. But I hated it. I hated lugging lights around. I hated dealing with actors. I hated dressing the set. I hated just all this stuff just seemed to me to get in the way of the story, which is what I was most interested in. But I to appease my parents, I switched out of film to study English, because of course I went to a college where they didn't offer an undergrad creative writing degree. But to appease my parents, I did a year of English lit graduate school in Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. But I sold my first comic series while I was there to Malibu, which of course we all knew, like selling something to Malibu in 1995 was your ticket to success. So I was like, this is easy.
That's the Golden Brick Road.
Right. So I was like, this is easy. I despise what I was doing in grad school. And my grades were not good either. Like if you get a B in English lit grad school, you will never get a job. So because of the competition so fierce. So I dropped out and moved to New York City. And of course, Malibu went out of business almost immediately thereafter. And it was 9 years in the wilderness, gents, until I tricked Marvel into hiring me.
That's always the big trick. Do you guys each remember kind of that first time, either finishing kind of your first big book or your biggest sketch, that you kind of realized that like you are in the field, like you are in what you set out to be, like you really are in the career that you wanted, and like it really hits you that like you made it.
It's funny because my first like mainstream comic was in '96. It was Prime, even though like they liked my pitch enough that I got to do like a Prime issue at Malibu. And the group editor of Prime at the time was Hank Lyons, who is our editor on GameMasters at Clover Press. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, for me, I came at I was trying to get into comics for years, but for a number of those years, I was working in the role playing game business, doing illustrations for source books and things. So as a result, I was able to go to various conventions with, on a badge from either FASA or White Wolf or whoever, and do the rounds and do it during the hours of the con when it was just pros on the floor. And that helped a great deal. It also helped back then. I was a bit of a clothes horse, so I was always wearing a suit. And this was before hipsters. So when you wore a suit, it was at a convention. Nobody, you were the thing that stuck out. There's like 30 guys dressed like Klingons, but they're all looking at you going like, what's that guy's deal? So the kind of the moment, so I was able to have like all sorts of really nice interactions with people, and I got the sense of this kind of, I don't want to say fraternity, but there was definitely a sense of like, oh, you're one of us.
Community.
A community, yes, thank you. There was very much a sense of like, oh, you're one of us kind of thing, even though you're not doing necessarily this yet. But I was able to get I was able to get my stuff looked at by various people, and I was able to do that kind of thing. And then one day, it was the second day of the last year of the Chicago Comic-Con before it became Wizard.
Yeah.
I went, and on the second day, the day before, I'd had a great meeting with, oh God, I'm losing names now. Sorry, it was an art director at DC, and I'd had a great interview with him. And then later in the day, I met Mike Allred for the first time. And little did I know that night they both had dinner with Bob Schreck, who was at the time, he was Oni Comics. And so the next day, this guy in an Oni Comics shirt, who's handling a line for Matt Wagner, with a badge that says like Herschel Zumway graphic designer or whatever, grabs me by the arm and says, "I heard about you. Be over there in 20 minutes. I want to look at your portfolio." and that was it. I had a job like 6 months later. But it was because I was the only guy there wearing a suit. So,
Always wear the suit.
yeah.
Well, and it's funny. Yeah, obviously you have sounds like a rich history back in RPG, and based off the book that we're going to be discussing, were you guys both big even now on tabletop games and RPG?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. There was a gulf of time between the ages of like 13 and 37 where I didn't touch a die. The whole time I was working in role-playing games, I not only did I not play them, but I was actively kind of looking down my nose at them, more or less. I mean, I wasn't doing it like I wasn't like giving anybody the hi hat or anything, but I was doing a lot of like, "Oh, you people with your thing, I don't care, just draw the monsters," kind of thing. But it wasn't until years later that I started, after I'd been in comics for a number of years and not in gaming, that I picked it up again and started gaming again, and absolutely adored it. So,
now, do you guys have a favorite tabletop or RPG, or do you guys kind of both agree? I mean, obviously Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like is the basis. I mean, I feel like that's kind of for most people.
I'm a real basic bitch, so for me it's Dungeons and Dragons. So
the comparison I like to make is that with role-playing games is like comparing comics franchises to role-playing game franchises. It'd be like in comics if the most popular franchise was Batman, and then the next most popular franchise was Squirrel Girl. Not there's anything wrong with Squirrel Girl, but like to have a healthy industry, you kind of need X-Men and Superman and Spider-Man and all the other sort of characters.
Correct.
Yeah, it's Dungeons and Dragons, is maybe arguably not fringe right now, but all the stuff below Dungeons and Dragons is pretty fringe. There's a time when Pathfinder, right, was bigger than Dungeons and Dragons. There was a time very briefly where arguably Vampire the Masquerade was bigger than Dungeons and Dragons, but for the most part, it's been dominated by this one game for 50 years. A game I personally don't particularly care for. But I have to play because my friends love it. I run a weekly D&D thing right now because my friends love it.
Yeah,
and I got really into Baldur's Gate 3. If I did not sunk hundreds of hours into Baldur's Gate 3, I would not be qualified to run a 5e D&D.
Yeah, and the thing is, the years that I was working in the gaming industry were the years where D&D actually had real competitors.
Yeah.
So I worked for White Wolf, I worked for FASA, I worked for, a number of others. My antipathy. It felt.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. It felt a lot more kind of evenly spaced, and by the time I came back to it, it was just D&D across the line, across the board. So that's what I fell into.
My antipathy for D&D has less to do with me disliking the system, as I just am not a high fantasy guy. Like, I never got into Tolkien. There's no girls, so I was like, whatever.
Yeah, and the thing is too, it's like my kid and his friends. My kid just turned 17 a couple of days ago, but he's been playing D&D since he was 4. And he and his friends, he's got like 2 or possibly 3 now different D&D crews that he plays with, but they've never, like, the analogy I always use is like Lego. You know, you buy the set, you build the set, then you take the set apart and you build whatever you want. You know, that's what they've done with this system, right? So he's one of the things he's working on, or one of the games he's playing right now. They're all space pirates, and they're all like he's a brain in a jar on a mech suit. I don't know that that's necessarily a character class in D&D, right? So they're just using the rules and they're stripping them down, building them back up again, and so it's yeah.
Starfinder, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the benefit of, I mean, done a game like that kind of gives you a rules that you can take kind of the basis for and make your own games. And it's funny because everyone, I don't know if you guys just found it or someone got you into it, but I feel like it's one of those gateway drugs where someone gets you into it. Because mine was Warhammer 40,000. Someone said, "Oh, don't worry, $30, we'll get you something started. Don't worry, this isn't that much." And then you're like, later on, you're like, "Oh, cool! I can't wait to show my wife my Space Marines."
I'm the one buying him all that stuff. It's we were in very briefly. We were a couple of years ago. I went to Thought Bubble, and so brought my family so we could all go to England. And we were in, or the UK at least, and we were in Edinburgh, sheltering from the rain one day. And my son is always he was 12 at the time, and always loved like miniatures and stuff. And I saw like the Warhammer store, and like the flagship store. And we went in to look around, and this guy came in and he's like, "So, would you like to learn how to play?" And I was like, "I don't know, he might be interested, sure." And I was like, I didn't think anything of it. And we were just like watching it. And I was like, we're just getting in and out of the rain, looking around. And he's like, "Well, it's very easy to play. So here you go," kind of thing. And he rolled, so he gave Graham like a fistful of dice and just point them down, did a very quick tutorial. And then when by the end of it, he was like, "We have good prices here. I can send it to you," kind of thing. And when I'm like, no, thank you. No, it's not raining anymore. Thank you. Goodbye.
Sorry, were you in the Russian district of Edinburgh?
Have you been to Scotland?
I've not.
Have you spoken to anyone in the service industry in the UK?
That's true. I guess that's true. There was a lot of polls that I remember.
Yeah. So at any rate, we leave the store, and immediately he was like, "We should get some of that." And I'm like, "Oh, goddamn."
It's all over.
Yeah, once you get the first one, you're like, "Oh, great! I built the vehicle," and then you look at the pages, and they're like, "Oh, you could have
reorganized the garage so he and his friends can have somewhere to play." So.
Yeah, they do a really good job at bringing you in slowly and then draining your pockets very easily. Well, that brings us to the whole point of why we're here, and that is to talk about your guys' book, GameMasters, which is crazy to me because I'm surprised it took this long to get something kind of this level kind of out there. Because RPGs and how they came to be, it is a really interesting story. I feel like for different games and the people that made it. Where did you guys kind of come together on this and sit down and say, we need to tell this story in kind of a fun medium?
It's all Tom's fault. His idea to begin with.
It's the result of a cascade of anxiety attacks that have taken about 7 years to produce this book. But Fred can start us off on the story.
So I, as many people know, do a lot of nonfiction comics. I do a lot with Brian Dunleavy, who was one of those aforementioned people at Syracuse University who were studying comics when I moved to New York with. We do books like Action Philosophers and the Comic Book History of Comics. And I'd been contracted by Random House to do the comic book story of basketball. They called it the comic book story of basketball because they knew I had cornered the comic book history name. And I asked Tom if he wanted to do it because Tom really reminds me of Jack Davis. And Jack Davis drew, to me, the most famous basketball comic of all time, which was the one-page ad for Spalding basketballs starring Dr. J that was the back of every late 70s, early 80s Marvel comic.
Which is one of the greatest pieces of comic book art ever.
I mean, it's fantastic. And
yeah.
And I should say to anyone hearing my voice, the Society of Illustrators has a fantastic Jack Davis retrospective up right now.
Really?
In Manhattan. Yeah, if you go to Society of Illustrators, it's fantastic. The Holy Grail is, I snapped a pic of this because Ryan Dunleavy's favorite movie is The Bad News Bears. And Jack Davis drew the poster. And the pencil sketch, which is actual size of the poster, the pencil study for that poster is in the show. So
we're going to talk when this is done, because I may be planning a trip to New York expressly to go to that.
I mean, it's awesome. And it's one floor of the society, so it's not that big. I don't know if it's New York trip worthy.
It's enough. It's enough for me.
Tom doesn't like sports.
No, I don't. So basically, he called up. I reminded him of Jack Davis, so he called up a 6'5" indoor kid who hates basketball to do this, because it represents everything I can't do, and it's the one question anyone over the age of 30 has asked me my entire life. It's like, oh, you're tall. You play basketball? And of course not. No, I don't. I sit in the corner and I moan about why girls don't talk to me. So I was immediately no. And I think there was another sport. I can't remember what it was. And I was immediately there. No, there were two sports in the conversation. Maybe football. And I had immediately, there's a fly. I immediately said no. And then a little disgusted with me and frustrated, Fred said, well, is there anything like down the line? Is there anything you would want to do? And I said, I don't know. D&D? Because I was in the middle of dealing with something else at the time. I was like, yeah, maybe D&D. Role playing, sure. And
Tom's problem is I'm extremely suggestible.
Yeah. It felt like there was a script in my hands 2 weeks later. I'm not good at judging time, so I'm sure it was like 6 months, but still I was like, no, I have another thing I have to do.
On the hook.
And so, yeah.
And then from there, you guys just kind of ran with it. Was it an easy?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say easy process, because it sounds like you guys have been working on it for a while. But
well, yeah. The problem with putting together a book like this, where you don't have a publisher already in line, is you're ostensibly doing it for free. So I had to make money to buy all of this, which meant at least 2 books for DC and another book for somebody else, and I would just kind of scratch away at it when I could. We're finally at the end of that process, so it was like, let's press the button. And we looked into a number of different. Fred wanted to go with the Kickstarter right away, and I have had a patchy history with crowdsourcing in the past, so I wasn't 100% cool with that. I wanted at least some sense of security. So we kind of shopped it around to a couple of publishers, and it came really close a couple of times and then didn't. And then I was talking to Hank Knaltz at Clover about something else, and then thought, you want this GameMasters thing? And he said yes. And it went pretty quickly after that. So it's kind of the best of both worlds,
Yeah. Now, when writing a book like this, there's so much information to pull from. I mean, from the beginnings, Gary Gygax and what they developed, to computers, to get to actual video games that we have today, to all the expansion cards only, dice only. Was it difficult to sort through all that and try to get to a kind of a streamlined process, or?
Well, difficult versus easy. It's like it's the old cliche: if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
It's challenging, but if you don't love research, if you don't like playing history detective, don't write history books. It's not for you. Do something else. And no, I love that stuff. There's a wealth of material out there on Dungeons and Dragons, as it's the Batman of role-playing games. But what I enjoyed was dealing with all the other systems and really tracing the D&D and games like it have really moved significantly from like vaguely accurate to physics simulations of actual reality to where we are now, which is really just a group storytelling game. I mean, even calling it a game is a little silly at this point, because it's not like that was the genius of Dave Arneson, Guy Gax's collaborator. I mean, really, when you come right down to it, where you get the endorphin hit from role-playing games, and this is as true, if not more true, in video games. I was just playing Starfield before I came up here, and I will go back to playing it after this show is over. The mods, by the way, totally sucked me in. Like everybody else, I was kind of not into it, but now it's totally sucked me back in. The real genius, what distinguishes a role-playing game is leveling, right? That's the game part. You're not, putting somebody's king in check. You're not, scoring the most goals in 90 minutes of game time. You're not, how does one win at Magic the Gathering? I don't really know. I played it once in 1995 and never went back.
You flip the table. You flip the table and you walk away.
You don't bust everybody out and have all the money like in Monopoly.
Nope.
But what makes it a game and what makes it playable is the character advancement process. Like that's the experience points, which technically were invented by H.G. Wells of all people, who was a huge, in addition to writing, The Time Machine and War of the Worlds and everything else, was a huge nerd who loved fighting with his little toys, and came up with this concept and realized very quickly that the only way to get people coming back was to have a campaign system, which is to say your scores rolled over. Like if you beat somebody at chess, it's like, well, that's over. It's in the next game, it's a completely new game. The genius of this, and a number of different levels, is the game. Each game session rolls on into the next. In theory, at least, it can go on forever until you die,
and then you just come back next campaign.
No, I meant you as a player. One day you will die and leave and shuffle off this mortal coil. But hey, if your other player,
then you come back as a different player, Fred.
I guess you're right, depending on your belief system. But what if you come back as an ant? I mean maybe they have. I guess they're social animals. They might have some sophisticated.
Yeah. You probably rolled low, but
it's right.
Nice.
That's right. I was a huge D&D player, but also a serial killer. So my karma was bad. So I've come back as a slug. God damn it!
All right, one blade of grass. All right.
Exactly.
Now, what has to be fun is obviously as you're tackling the history of this, there's a lot of rich characters. I mean, obviously the people that make a game like this, you can't just have Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos are not making this game. I don't think that they could really think that creatively. So, was it fun to write and kind of draw this out? Because you're given a system in a game that essentially is so creative and to the mind that there's kind of not really a boundary per se within the story.
If I can praise Tom for a moment, like he really got to I've worked with Ryan for so long. We've done 800 million nonfiction comics. This is not easy because for most comics, you're doing a story and there's a panel to panel transition. But in one panel, Tom might be drawing a bunch of D&D characters in a blender getting chopped up. In the next panel, he's drawing a space captain putting her hat on. In the next panel, it's a big space, like it's just boom, boom, boom. It's just boom, boom. And Tom, you really took to it like a fish to water.
It's me flexing all of my old Mad Magazine muscles. I've banged on about this a few times in some of these interviews, but I tend to be I don't really believe in the idea of developing a style. I don't think that's a valuable exercise. The old Kelly Freas quote was something like, "Your style is a combination of all the mistakes you don't know you're making." So I just help people learn how to draw, right? Now, what comes out the other end, that's your style. But for me, when I approach a book, I tend to think of things on a slide, right? So you've got a slide rule that goes from abstract to realistic, and whatever the job requires. If I'm drawing Batman, I'll go probably a bit more toward realistic end of the scale. If I'm drawing, how-toons, I'll go a bit more toward the abstract side. For lack of a better term, the more cartoony side of things. So in a book like GameMasters, I'm just sliding that scale back and forth from panel to panel, because that's what the job requires. So there's a lot, and there's a lot of visual reference, and who's this guy again? And Fred's great at providing a lot of that stuff, but then I have to track down more of it to make sure I'm getting the right person the right way at the right time.
Well, in real people, right? They change their hairstyles.
Yeah.
Right? They go bald. They have mustache. I didn't know.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion of Dave Arneson mustache continuity, which I'm sure I got wrong for some of it.
I have a list of notes. We'll go over before we go to break.
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
no biggie.
The
Easily.
Mustache Chad.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of thing,
Yeah. Now, obviously, you guys have done a lot of research, or especially Fred. I mean, you have a lot of information to write and kind of pack into this. Was there anything you guys, and especially Tom, by drawing it, that you guys had learned through this process that you were surprised about, that you didn't know about RPGs? Or
I mean, on my end, almost everything. When I kind of shrugged and said, I don't know, why don't we do D&D? It was just because I was into D&D. I don't know anything about the history of it. Like, I'm in a weird kind of way, like while I was reading the scripts and drawing the book, I'm in a very meta way, I'm learning along with the audience about these histories, about these people, about one thing or another. So a lot of it was fascinating for me. I suppose I didn't know a lot of in the ups and downs of TSR and Gary Gygax. I didn't know a lot of that stuff, which I think I'd heard kind of whispers of one thing or another while I was working in the games industry, but at the time I didn't care. I mean, these were just names that kind of bounced off of me because at the time I wasn't a gamer, and it didn't, I wasn't terribly interested in the history. Now it's fascinating to see how all of these, how these different kind of marbles kind of dropped, and where they took the whole thing. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that Gygax, people just sort of crave, you see the same thing in comics with, Stan Lee being put on such a high pedestal that he may or may not have deserved. It's really interesting how we crave as sort of social animals the alpha and this dominating presence. Gygax is, there's two names on the 50-year-old edition of the box edition of Dungeons and Dragons, Arnesons and Gygax, but for a variety of reasons, there's a lot of parallels with Stan Lee, right? The Gygax was the more business oriented. Not that I'm saying Arneson was Jack Kirby; he really wasn't. No one was, but Gygax got kicked out of his own company, PSR, in December 1985. So we're sitting here talking about the 50th year anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. Gygax barely made it past the 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
So it's sort of fascinating how these figures just kind of dominate. And one of the things that when Ryan and I did the comic book history of comics, the challenge of doing that was, pop culture history and sort of geek history gets written by fans, and fans, generally speaking, care about what they care about. They care about Batman, or they care about R. Crumb, or they care about horror comics, they care about romantic. Like none of them, like we wanted to do the whole thing. And most of the big books on RPG history are about Dungeons and Dragons, because that's by far the most popular of this game.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting to sort of show how other games fed into that. And I think we're going to end probably with Dungeons and Dragons. It's exciting because I haven't written the last pages yet. I like to hold off until just in case something crazy happens and they didn't put it in the book, so that'll be happening this week. But yeah, so it's just sort of interesting to me that I learned all sorts of stuff. Like the thing that I keep bringing up, just because it's a comic, the thing that in speaking of Gygax, he did this very famous Appendix N in the original Dungeon Masters Guide, where he talked about all the novels primarily that he was influenced by. And in Appendix N, he says, I also put a lot of love of comics into Dungeons and Dragons. And my favorite were the EC comics, which, I don't see a lot of EC comics in Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like, when you were 40 years old in 1974, that to make people think you were cool, you said you loved EC comics because they were the cool comics, But the original illustration of the Dungeons and Dragons box set is ripped off of Doctor Strange. It's a Dan Adkins Doctor Strange panel from Strange Tales 167. And the other funny thing that's on the cover, and then the other funny thing is that the interior illustrations also ripped off from that same comic, and that was back when Doctor Strange shared Strange Tales with Nick Fury. So there's a bunch of Nick Fury rip-off illustrations in Dungeons and Dragons. They just erased Nick Fury. He's pointing a gun. They just erased the gun and put a sword in his hand instead. It's pretty hilarious. The high schoolers who were getting paid in string to draw for Dungeons and Dragons were, they owned one comic that was at that point 7 years old.
Paid dividends then.
Yeah, exactly. That 12 cents is going far.
Yeah.
Good investments.
Exactly. So with this book, obviously when people read it, you want them to enjoy the story, the hard work you put into it. What would be the other thing you're hoping that they'll kind of take away from reading this?
I think when we get to the summary, this is something that I feel pretty strongly about. I think that what part of the reason that tabletop role-playing games are enjoying this renaissance is that I wouldn't go as far as to call it a reaction against the social media age, but it definitely doesn't hurt that social media has paradoxically deadened our interactions with each other. I know so many people whose only real contact with the outside world, but beyond the bare minimum of what they need to do for work and family, is Twitter, right? Yeah. Or Facebook or whatever. And I just don't think that's healthy because so many people bullshit their way through social media. And other games like tennis or I don't know, whatever you're playing, pickleball, God help you. That's not a social interaction. This is a social game. This is social interaction. Even if you're on Zoom, even if you're on Roll20, you're still interacting with other people. And I just think that's become way more valuable in 2024 than it was even in 1974.
Yeah, and this is something else that I've been talking about a lot lately in interviews is, as a parent, you're always, educators are telling you about the value of things like creative play for kids and developing communities and developing strategies to talk to each other and communicate. And, as I've thought about it and this book more and more, and my own kind of struggles and kind of what brought me back from some things, is that I don't think that sense of creative play, I don't think it goes away. I don't think it's something that it should be left behind when you put childish things aside. I mean, if you're going on the internet and telling people they like the Flash wrong, put that childish thing aside. But in terms of in terms of just those kind of valuable creative interactions with people, that genuine sense of play, whether it's a stress reliever or it builds communities or whatever, I think it's vitally important. And I think it's important it's as important now as it was when you were a kid. And beyond that, just specific to the book, I suppose the thing that I want people to take away from it more than anything else is just the sense that, there is a history to this. Like, people work very hard to do these things, to bring this stuff to you. And there's a sensibility, I certainly grew up with it. There's a sensibility of looking down on, trash culture whether it was comics at one time, whether it was role-playing games, whether it was, these things are more mainstream now, but it doesn't change that perception to whatever degree. And at the end of the day, though, people worked lots and lots and lots of people for thousands of years worked very hard to continue this sense of creative play, to create these games, to create any game, to help us deal with what's going on in the world and process those things, and that's important. And it's important to kind of remember those people and,
as you said
to
online,
learn
Tom,
about them.
Well, as you said online, Tom, this is we're fighting against the AIs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this idea that
we're not fighting against the AIs. We're
Not yet.
We're fighting against morons. But morons with money are still powerful morons.
AI weaponized morons. But it's humans coming together, whether on cyberspace or in meat space, to create something together, and I think that's fantastic and it's worth celebrating.
Definitely. Now, obviously, you guys have put a lot of different systems, different games that you talked in this book. If you were to meet someone that was a beginner that said, I got 4 friends together, we're looking to invest in a game, we're looking to try tabletop games or RPG, do you have one for like a beginner set that you'd be like, you know what, I think you'll really enjoy playing this and it'll give you a somewhat solid foundation?
I mean, there's a role-playing game for every genre, so I would probably start being like, do you like science fiction? Do you like horror? So that would be like Traveler, Call of Cthulhu. Do you like Star Wars? There is a Star Wars role-playing game. I mean, part of the reason I think D&D is so addictive is the sheer, like, you can really pimp your ride, right, with because now D&D is the sheer number of feats and powers and crap your character can have is just kind of astonishing,
but again, it's the Lego analogy. I mean, I would typically again, I would do the same thing. I would find out what they're actually into, because I don't actually have a wider experience with a lot of other games and game systems, but certainly 5th edition is the most kind of 5th edition D&D is the most kind of starter friendly version of D&D since AD&D. You need almost nothing to get started. It is very understandable. And if somebody isn't into high fantasy, you can always say, well, keep the rule set and then just change the words. It's not the first character I ever played in D&D, or at least when I came back to it at 37, was a Yeti. There aren't any Yetis in the book. I've played elephant. I played a blind telepathic elephant. I played an alien. I played a dwarf with antlers. That you could probably find that in the book. But I've played all sorts of different things that I just like. Well, this seems fun. My most recent character. I mean, I played like a battle Paddington. My most recent character was a hyena man named Skurlock Gnomes, who's the world's greatest meat detective. Now, none of that's in the books. You can just make that shit up. But it's the system that it's being able to go through to find an easy enough to understand system for what people are interested in doing. If you get too bogged down in a lot of minutia in whatever system it is, it's probably going to turn people off. There are systems that I've tried to figure out and been like, oh, and it's just a question of how well oiled that machine is to plug whatever the hell you want to plug into it. That's probably that. Although I will put in a good word for, there is a free 2-page PDF game that you can find online called Honey Heist, where basically you play a group of bears trying to pull a heist, and it is the easiest thing to understand. is one of the most fun games to play. It's one of the few times I've actually GM'd, and I've done it multiple times. But again, like you can find your level. It's there.
It's amazing how many fantastic like licensed games there are. Like my friend in my D&D group, she's a big My Little Pony nut, and she ran us through the My Little Pony role-playing game, which was super fun. The Star Trek game is awesome. By Manipulating the new Marvel RPG, the designer Matt Frobeck very kindly blurbed our GameMasters book. It's fantastic. So
yeah, I've known Forbeck for years, like since I mean, we used to work together when I was working in gaming. So it's there's stuff. There's
for
stuff
everyone.
to find, yeah.
Perfect. And then
D&D.
yeah.
Why not?
So
reskin it.
It's good enough for Stranger Things. So
I mean, that definitely boosted a lot.
Oh yeah.
I guess one last question would be, when designing the book, obviously this is going to be a pretty decent sized book. There's a lot of history. Design wise, did you think about doing like the old fashioned, like the hardcover, like the old, like D&D manual?
That was almost literally our first discussion. I was like, if I'm doing this, here's how I want it to look. And so the actual dimensions of the book, the feel of the book, are all taken from do I have it down here? No, I don't. Are all taken from like the books that I grew up with, which are the AD&D, the second edition books, the ones after that.
Yeah, but your cover looks more like this.
Yeah, my cover looks like that because that's more iconic than the other one. But yeah, so even the I didn't
you briefly, Tom. My favorite thing about this book is Ryan of Actual Lost Fames found these set on the street in Brooklyn. It's great because I don't know if you guys can see this, but all of my AD&D books were owned by a girl named Carol Lipsky, and she drew unicorns in every single book. I don't know where Carol is. I'm going to assume she was a child in the 70s like myself. I hope she's loving life somewhere because I have all her
I'm sure Carol is a champion.
I know.
But yeah, so I even measured the text block of the pages, and that's my live area for drawing. No, obviously it's going to be in color because nobody would buy if it was in black and white. But that's the only concession we've really given. I even asked Hank to research and see if he could find. We're still waiting to find out about this. Find the actual, the texture on the outside of the books. It had that kind of leathery, canvasy kind of feel to them. I want that. I want that on these books.
Yes,
desperately. And so if we can find it, if we can locate it, wherever we get these things printed, it's going on there. So I wanted it to feel as much as possible like one of those books, just as a tactile object. So yeah, that was there from the beginning. That unfortunately that's how my brain works, and it's one of those things that short circuits other things, but when everything actually manages to come together, it winds up being a more kind of special thing. And that's the other reason we kind of went with Clover is, I feel like Clover could deliver something like that, because they make good looking books. So
yeah, and Clover was co-founded by the guys who co-founded IDW, who brought me and Ryan in to do their Why We Are published. Our Comic History Comics is published at IDW, so we have a long history with them.
Yeah, no, definitely. As soon as I read the description, I was really hoping that this was going to be a player manual book after the description. So I am very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
100%.
For everyone listening who is interested and they want to know when is this coming out, where can they start signing up for kind of updates on it, and they can start getting ready to.
The Kickstarter goes until August 21st. I don't know when you're dropping this sucker, but I assume well before then.
Yes.
So head on over to Kickstarter. If you can spell GameMasters, that's where you'll find it. Or put in me or Tom's name; it'll probably pop up.
Or put in Clover Press. It'll be the first thing that pops up for really all four.
Yeah.
And then it'll get published. I'm
Before
not
the end of the
certain
year.
when. Yeah.
Bill Crabtree, our wonderful colorist, is banging away. Tom is.
I'm inking the last few pages. So.
Yep. So it's gonna happen. Fear not.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess, Clover, also through BackerKit, you probably, if for whatever reason you are listening to this after August 25th, 23rd, sorry, I believe you can still pre-order it on BackerKit. That's usually how that works these days. And then there's going to be a resale version at some point in 2025.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, everyone will be looking out for that. We'll include all the links for everything once we put this on Instagram and YouTube. And for everyone that's interested in staying up to date with what you guys are working on, where are the best places to find you?
Fred?
You can sign up for my newsletter at fredvanlente.com, and I am Fred Van Lente at literally all of the social media sites I can handle, which at this point is Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, .com, all your favorites.
Yeah, and I am Tom Fowler Bug on Twitter, Tom Fowler Art on Instagram, and then just Tom Fowler on Blue Sky and Kara and possibly somewhere else. And failing that, you can just Google Tom Fowler. I'm the one that did not play bass for Frank Zappa.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on and talking about this book. I know we're all excited. GameMasters. You guys can follow the links as we post this. Back it now, and sounds like you'll have this in your hands by the end of the year. We look forward to reading it. Thank you guys for coming on. Everyone listening, hope you enjoyed. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.